my name is Burton. I'm the author of this book, Grammar in ELT and ELT Materials. So this is a book that explores grammar coverage in mainstream ELT. So by looking at primary sources like course books and grammars, and also using interview data with some quite prominent people within English language teaching within the industry, I tried to both explore the status quo in terms of how grammar is covered, investigate whether there's a consensus, how valid that is, but also I tried to explore how we got to the status quo, so how grammar in ELT evolved basically. One of the questions I've been asked is my position on mainstream ELT publishing and course books, obviously particularly in terms of grammar, and I'll start answering that question by saying I never really wanted this book to be an overt critique. It's more of an exploration, trying to solve a puzzle almost, because there was for me this mystery of, well, where does all this tradition of grammar in ELT come from? So I'm thinking about the level system, the number of levels, the list of grammar points, that familiar list that if anyone who's worked in ELT is be quite familiar with. How then the grammar points are linked to the levels in the level system, even the wording of the rules, the example sentences that are given. So I really wanted to explore all of that, try and find where it comes from, rather than critique it, because it hadn't really been done before. So I wanted to be able to say with confidence, this is what ELT course books do now in terms of grammar. But I also wanted to be able to say, well, this is what they did at the beginning of the 20th century, or in the 50s, or in the 60s. Because you sometimes hear people say, well, back then it was all drilling and repetition and everything was dominated by grammar. But if you look at the older books, that wasn't really true. That's just something that's assumed, but you have to look at the primary sources to see that. Also, the interview data was really important to me for telling the story. I think if you think about how influential published ELT materials are around the world, then if we're honest, the people who write them and edit them are probably more influential on what goes on in the classroom than most applied linguistics researchers. But there is this idea of, well, course book authors are just ignoring SLA research. And I really wanted to explore that, so we're not just making assumptions about why ELT course books and grammars are the way they are, simply based on the end result, simply just looking at the published materials. If I had to take a position, I would definitely say we can improve things. We can give better, more accurate information about grammar. We can probably identify things that aren't taught that should be, maybe identify things we should spend less time on. I think in terms of sequencing, there's this idea of simple grammar, advanced grammar, intermediate grammar, but it's not necessarily very sound from an empirical point of view. And we've got data sources now like the English Grammar Profile. We're starting to get an idea of developmental sequences from much bigger data sets than before. Another thing I tried to show in the book is just how stagnant some things are or have become. I think there's a lot of what you could call conventional wisdom. So I'm thinking about the level assignments, but also other things are dealt with very dogmatically, like conditionals, for example. One very interesting thing that came from my data is that this dogmatism is actually quite a recent development. I found that it goes back to around about in the 1980s. It's not something that we've inherited from the 19th century, which is what people might think. It's quite a recent phenomenon. I think actually that means it might be a bit easier to change. At the same time, I also feel quite strongly that we shouldn't be arrogant and assume that as researchers we know better, and that ELT materials are developed in some kind of methodological vacuum, because they're not. My data shows that they take into account a whole load of considerations that maybe researchers are not aware of. So just as we don't want materials authors to ignore or be ignorant of research findings, I think that we as researchers as well need to be very careful not to be ignorant of the classroom realities that people who produce course books and grammar books actually have to consider.